what are some of the common mistakes you've seen, very early stage founders making when they're trying to sort of create impact?
I think you can create irreversible system change if something.
In India, if you're trying to solve a social problem, you're spoiled for choice.
Hello, everyone. Okay, I think we can start. Thanks for joining us today for this session on how nonprofits can create systemic change. Very quickly, I am Shubham. I'm one of the co-founders of ACE Impact, which is India's first accelerator for high-impact nonprofits that can create systemic change. We are still accepting applications, so if you're building a nonprofit, please do apply. And I'm very excited to have with me here today Hanisha and Tarun joining me for this discussion. I'll just quickly introduce them before we dive straight into the topic of discussion. Hanisha is a managing partner and founder of Majority Fund, which is an early stage impact investment fund. And they're supporting entrepreneurs who are building tools and solutions for people living below rupees 500 per day. She was earlier managing a portfolio for United Nations World Food Program, and she was also part of the 2020 Nobel Peace Prize winning team there. Tarun, on the other hand, is an Harvard alum and a Obama Foundation fellow. He founded a social enterprise called Intersection, where they bridge gap between policy and its on-ground implementation by empowering communities and building tools to do that. And I'm very excited to be able to speak to them on this topic today. I'll just quickly check if Hanisha, you're there on the call.
Yeah, I'm here.
Awesome.
Sorry, my network's a little iffy, so I can't keep my camera on, if that's okay.
No worries, that's fine. That works. So maybe we can probably start off with defining what is systems change or what is systemic impact, and maybe Hanisha, we can start off with you and sort of help define the problem in itself.
So, I mean, I generally don't think in terms of large systems, but I'll give it a shot. Systems change is typically when you're trying to make a difference on a topic, on a issue that is massive. I mean, like they call it the big, hairy, audacious goal kind of thing. But and necessarily, if you're trying to touch one thing, you will end up affecting another. I'll give you an example. Right now, for example, I'm building a food security. I'm trying to measure food security for a country. And you're sitting and trying to list out, okay, what are the components of that? What are the various indicators that might be required to even begin to analyze this thing? And then you realize, hey, food security has something to do with water security, which because if you can't grow enough food, it's possibly due to the fact that there's not enough water for irrigation. It's related to labor costs. It's related to GDP in the sense that if people don't have enough opportunities for earnings, then it's possible that they may be underfed, undernourished, etc. So for me, it also ends up being helpful to then quickly analyze something like this and pick one side to work on, rather than getting bogged down in the full details. And saying, okay, and then finally ending up saying, I can't fix any of this.
Yeah.
So literal problem statement. I'm in another country right now building a food security dashboard for the country.
Yeah.
And the whole point is that food price inflation in that country grows 1% per month. Last year to this year, food has become 10% more expensive.
Yeah.
You could look at that and analyze it from 15 different angles and then say, okay, I can't solve a single thing, forget it.
Yeah.
The question is to then look at, come down to one point and say, okay, I can solve this with my skills, with my connections, with what I know today, and it may change the problem. It may solve the problem to about 4 to 5%, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Pick the best dent that you can make at the problem and move, rather than trying to move the entire system as a whole.
Yeah.
That's my approach typically.
Yeah. So basically,
True.
you're saying that, like identifying what are the relationships and like between different pieces and stakeholders, and then
Yeah.
figuring out where is it that you can sort of make a dent with your current resources, all of that. And
Yeah.
then understanding how
I
those
mean,
relationships will propagate it. Right?
sure.
Sorry, you were saying something.
No, I'm done. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. And Tarun, maybe sort of jumping to you, as you were starting Indus Action, just wanted to like get into your head and like understand how were you thinking about what Indus Action should set out to do and how it will impact the system, larger system at play.
Yeah, no, I'll build on I think what Hanisha said. So when I was starting up in this action, I was a teacher before that in a school. So like my view of the system was very micro. I was the last mile delivery person of what was intended in policy. And in fact, the Right to Education Act came into effect when I started off as a teacher. I taught in a budget private school, so a lot of new laws then applied to all schools, including kind of budget private schools. uh, and that experience kind of made me realize that a lot of well-intentioned law doesn't translate into applicable practice. So for example, there were mandates around what a school is, right? A boundary wall, a toilet, a certain kind of infrastructure, and a certain lab, etc., etc., and of course certain software as well, a comprehensive curriculum framework, mixed classrooms in private schools, etc., school management committees, so much teacher pupil ratio. All of these were rules which were part of the clause of Right to Education Act. And what was the paradox was, in my school a lot of the laws were not being met. Like, we didn't have a boundary wall, we didn't have functional toilets, we didn't have a science lab, we didn't have a proper playground. The tin roof would leak, and on a good rainy day the school would be shut. But surprisingly, the school, like managed to have kind of almost 100% graduation rates, but 95% attendance, and teachers with no B.Ed qualification, having 95% attendance themselves, students having 90% plus attendance. So that was the paradox. I was really puzzled that, like, what is being well intended as progressive and well intentioned law, none of those conditions are being met here. None of those enabling conditions. Intuitively, obviously, as an outsider, you come in and say, hey, these things need to exist in a school. I went to a school where all of these facilities were available to me, and it enabled a sort of education for me. So that was the paradox. Like, I wanted to really understand better, one, like, how are these actually policies made, why are they far removed from the actual reality. And that school would have been shut down if the law was properly actually followed through. That school ought to be shut down by the reading of the law, the letter of the law. But it was meeting the spirit of the law. Like, like, parents were feeling that the school was accountable to, and these were like, in Hanisha's kind of funds work, like, people who are earning less than 500 rupees per day, who are investing 20% of their daily income or monthly income into, in the hope at, better chance at quality education. And they were supposedly getting value, right? So, because they were retaining the students, they were not, moving them to the neighborhood government schools, which had all these facilities, but teachers weren't showing up there, and they weren't receiving, instruction. So this is a puzzle for me. So I studied, and I studied particularly the RT Act, and so this is one feature of systems change. I think, like, the ability to then see a problem at a whole population scale. Hanisha mentioned this as well, at a country scale, and whatever your unit is, I think, and whatever problem that you've diagnosed, the first feature, I think, of systems change is not to just be caught up in the system in which you have a role. Here, like, I was a teacher, I had a role in a particular system, which is just the budget private school in a particular area in Pune, etc. The first feature, I think, is to be able to actually zoom out and see the complete system as a whole. So in this case, the education system as a whole, what is it in India, and what is the comparative literature for other education systems. So that's one feature, like, of systems change, to be able to actually step back and imagine the whole system. And then, to I think the second feature is what Hanisha said. So then you'll see a lot of intersectionality. So your education system interacts with health system, it interacts with, obviously, public infrastructure, the roads to the school matter, the sanitation facilities matter, the The Anganwadis matter as preschool systems. The primary healthcare center matters. The public hospital in the area matters. The municipality matters. So then like you'll have all these intersectional systems. The second feature is to see how then state, market, and society, the three broad I think distinctions. Samaj, Sarkar, Bazaar, as the three broad systems, and how actually then these start to interact in your problem of interest or passion, and where are actually the capacity gaps. So there is a domino. So if the education system is failing, there are many other intersectional systems which possibly would be failing as well, for that last mile delivery capacity to not happen. So for example, like in the school, if the education system is failing and the infrastructure doesn't exist, it means that public works department system is obviously probably failing to reach the last mile as well. And if children are falling sick and deworming tablets haven't been given, and that's the underlying reason for low attendance, or the midday meals aren't working, and that's the underlying reason for low attendance, and clearly then either the food and supplies department system is failing, or the public health system is failing. So then the second step is to really clearly see the other intersectionalities as well. Uh, and I think then kind of figure out, like, once again what Hanisha said. So then of course you can't change all of them, but I think before making an intervention, I feel like, as potential entrepreneurs, and this is one thing I had the time and luxury to do. I did 2 years of my master's education, and it gave me the time and space to really think deeply about what I was concerned about, which is essentially this: like, there are progressive policies on paper, and India manages to pass very progressive legislation, which is kind of, if you benchmark in the world, it's far ahead of like our own kind of democracy trajectory, per capita income trajectory. But it doesn't have the state capacity and the civic capacity to actually implement it in spirit. So that was what I was puzzled about. And so then the third step is then finding a margin for intervention. So I came from that kind of really full macro view and understanding to say, then I picked a margin, which was like, okay, let me focus on uh, this one particular clause within the Right to Education Act, which was a source of a lot of conflict, which was 12(1)(c), which basically mandated that 25% of seats in private schools be allocated to children from disadvantaged backgrounds. So it was contested because it went to kind of heart of the class dynamics in India, the caste divide, and a lot of other kind of factional divides and schisms in India. So, private schools opposed it, teacher unions opposed it. It went all the way to Supreme Court, and Supreme Court upheld it after 4 years. And it was around that time I was graduating as well. So I thought, like, this is a good kind of, intervention point and margin. Every year, about 2 million, children from disadvantaged backgrounds stand to benefit. The Supreme Court has upheld it. Now, this is a constitutionally valid clause, and states have to follow through. And this would mean that almost 2 million kids every year stand to benefit to go to a school in their neighborhood, which they deem to be of higher quality. So that's kind of the margin I thought I could start with to kind of make systems change. So I could start in a small geography, help a few children secure access to this legislation, but it all adds up to this denominator of at least 2 million kids every year. And I knew the math, like every year about 25 million kids were entering the schooling system, and at that point, like 16 million were entering the private schooling system, and 9 million were entering the government system. Sorry, it was the other way around. 16 million were in government schools and 9 million were in private schools. But the 9 million who were entering private schools had the ability to pay. Their parents had the ability to pay, and 16 million went to government schools because their parents had no other choice. They belonged to economic and kind of caste demographies where the only choice was the neighborhood public school. And this particular policy was trying to kind of create a wedge in that kind of entry point, saying that no, these 16 million students will have an opportunity for almost 2 million seats every year, and enhance kind of their ability to put pressure on public systems as well. So I thought, like, overall, like, it was a very interesting intervention, that it was trying to create demand for the most vulnerable populations to have kind of a voice in kind of the kind of schooling they wanted, they wanted the children to have, and gave that as a fundamental right. So yeah, I'll stop pause there, but just to summarize, I think the features I see of systems changes, it's important to have a diagnosis that the full population scale of the problem you're interested in. It is also important to then see intersectionalities with other systems. Of course, I didn't mention other social systems clearly, like class, caste, gender. Like those are other social systems which interact as well in the system of interest. And thirdly, then finding the locus of influence or control or margin that where you can start on the problem, which you feel then will have this kind of effect on multiple systems, if not one.
Yeah.
That's how I saw 12 and C. Though it is like it seems like a very focused intervention on getting kids into private schools, I actually possibly thought there is a general equilibrium possible where by virtue of this demand, maybe there'll be a push for better public schooling outcomes as well.
Very interesting. And I think one thing that I also sort of took away from this from your journey is also that you sort of used the existing infrastructure and the regulation to sort of scale or build the intervention up, rather than saying, this is a huge system that like needs reworking, let's build everything from scratch. Also what Hanisha was saying, then you can get bogged down with trying to fix everything and not being able to move a needle there.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think systems change is one quick reaction I have to that is I think you can create irreversible system change if something, becomes obviously, gets eventually codified into a law, right? And of course, like, laws then don't translate into practice and become norms. And that's where, like, really cultivating and activating demand is the other form of irreversible kind of, systems change. If, people's expectations and demand change for something, so then that's irreversible as well because norms have changed and sometimes law is ahead of norms and like then you have to cultivate those norms to be in line with law uh, but sometimes like norms itself can lead to kind of the change in laws uh, yeah, and then we have a lot of examples in that respect as well. So for example, microfinance was first norms that changed from the markets and that eventually then became uh, acts and laws in terms of rural livelihood missions, etc. Yeah,
Got it.
so it can happen both ways. Yeah.
Interesting. And also, I mean, jumping to Hanisha a little bit on this, because I think she has been talking to a lot of entrepreneurs as part of her work. I think one very interesting thing that I want to sort of get your thoughts on was what are some of the common mistakes you've seen, very early stage founders making when they're trying to sort of create impact and build their organizations from ground up. I think you mentioned one that not being able to pick the right problem or define it better. But what would be some other mistakes you have seen founders making?
See, one of the most common mistakes I think that happens is that you fall in love with the solution and not the problem. I think that's true of both impact and not impact.
Yeah.
Perhaps slightly more on the non-impact side, especially where there are engineer founders who came up with some cool technology. But
Yeah.
we see that in the impact space as well. I mean, and there is significant fatigue at beneficiaries, especially feeling like, okay, here's yet another thing that somebody came to try along on us. If especially if you're looking at an impact solution where you think you might need to raise grant money, donors are also tired. Donors are
Yeah.
tired of everybody coming along and touting the next cool thing, saying, okay, I'm going to put blockchain to figure out traceability so that we can pay a coffee farmer 15% more, etc., etc., where a database would have probably done, and everybody realizes, so there is those are some common that is one, like falling in love with the solution, or trying to over engineer the solution, trying to be excessively engineered because you think that's what will sell,
Yeah.
rather than picking the solution. And the solutions could be simple. I mean, again, coming to Tarun's point, something we used to do at the World Food Program. The World Food Program runs school meal programs for multiple countries, not India, fortunately, but for about 12 million children fed on a daily basis. And if you think about it, it sounds slightly counterintuitive. But the best way to keep a child in school is to feed them one meal a day. One of the best ROIs. I mean, where will you even think about? So sometimes, being too close to the problem and not thinking out of the box enough also could happen. I mean, whether you're trying to solve attendance by some other way, etc. Where- So being over, uh, how do you call it, over innovative and being under innovative are both sort of things we have seen. But and lastly, not having a numbers focus, not having a target focus. You start out by saying, okay, this is a problem I want to solve, but not having a clear number in mind as to how you're going to keep yourself going, because these are tough problems. If you're sitting out there and saying, okay, I want to solve poverty, too big, right? If you say, I want to bring 100 people sustainably out of poverty in the next 1 year, you might be able to hold yourself to that target, keep yourself motivated enough to move forward. So those two three things.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense because even at Change Engine for us, one of the things that we've had long discussions with founder is defining the North Star metrics. I think it's slightly easier for for-profit companies because it's usually revenue or some form of uh,
Yeah.
user engagement. But in case of impact, it becomes very difficult. So, like
Yeah.
any anecdotes that you've had with entrepreneurs, and also in your own work, how have you defined North Star metrics
Yeah.
at World Food Program and
No,
other places?
no, literally, that's what I'm saying, right? Not just entrepreneurs, happens to us as well. So I used to lead sourcing for the World Food Program Innovation Accelerator, where we were looking at working with startups to reduce hunger. And now, at that time, about 4 5 years ago, hunger was an 820 million problem. Basically, we are saying 1 in 9 human beings on Earth goes to bed hungry each night. 820 million human beings do not have enough food to eat. Um, so when given this problem statement and a certain budget to invest into startups, I went through every single one of the things that I've mentioned. Okay, got really faced by the issue. Okay, I have a limited budget. I don't have an unlimited budget. Though I mean, part of a large organization with $1 billion budget, my budget is not $1 billion. And even with the so like the organization itself had a $10 billion budget, okay, annually, and yet was able to only reach out to 81 million people per annum out of the 820. And like I didn't even have like 1% of that budget, obviously. So how much can we make? How much of a dent can you make? But then you straight away say, okay, my target is 820 million. That's exactly the problem. Taking too big a target and saying, okay, I want to make a dent in the entire 820 million in the next 5 years. Not happening, right? And so if you are allowed to say, for example, if your budget allows you to invest in say 10 startups in that year, uh, you can either go, oh, this one is solving a problem for like Boko Haram in Nigeria, and it will help save the lives of herders, etc., etc. But it's going to do it sustainably for say 5,000 people. And or there is another one that could potentially do 8 million, 10 million, whatever, customers slash beneficiaries, if you want to think of it like that. So I ended up going too much into the, okay, let me try to aim for the big number. Let me try to look only for the startups that have a scalability potential, and try to hit as much of the 820 million as possible, not realizing, of course, that there are deeper challenges involved. It's not just a matter of parachuting a startup into a situation and saying, okay, fix this. So like I said, every single one of these problems, both VCs and startups have gone through. So it's yeah, the question, the key is to iterate. The key is to keep asking yourself whether you're doing the best possible use of your efforts. That's all.
Interesting. And so, what did you end up, finalizing as your metrics when you were supporting these startups? That's very interesting. I think
So I
also
mean,
very relevant for us
I
at changing.
still continue to hold the large numbers a little bit, but left a little bit of the budget for the startup. So like, it, if I'm putting it badly, what I'm trying to say is, if I had the option between a startup that is going to go broad and hit 8 10 million customers, and another startup that's going to go deep and sustainably solve the problem for say a few thousand customers, I was, because I was coming from the private sector, I was fully inclined towards acha, $8 million, 8 million customers, 10 million customers, even if the problem is not sustainably solved. Whereas, we basically then created a sub allocation saying, okay, we can try this out and see if we can support to scale it in some interesting ways. Like if the founder can't visualize the scale, perhaps we can figure out another way to do it. So
Got it. Very interesting. And Tarun, like, would love to get your thoughts on this. This is very cool.
I mean, this is a classical, I guess, any systems leader or entrepreneur dilemma as well. So, I mean, a lot of people frame this as like, do you want to go, inch wide and mile deep, like Hanisha was saying, that startup focused on 5,000 people, or do you want to go mile wide and inch deep? So part of it is, I think, like, your, entrepreneurs' own kind of, ideology, beliefs, and, how they view the system. I think there is, what I definitely agree with, like, and this is what Hanisha was alluding to as well. Like, I think irrespective of what you choose between, those two paradigms, it is important to remember the denominator. Ultimately, the denominator is, 820 million in, food security problem case in India. Like, a billion people, need a social safety net. They're just one shock away from perpetually being in poverty, even if India grows by 8% for the next, 3 decades. We'll still have a billion people who are just a shock away from falling back into poverty trap. So whatever is the problem that you're solving, the denominator always should be at the back of your mind. And I feel like the role of then a social entrepreneur or an enterprise or even a social enterprise as well is to figure out, like, on which margin do you want to innovate. And my take is, I think the role of you know non-profits or social enterprise is to discover solutions, or to discover the protocols, which which work for solving that problem. Then who obviously gets credit for taking those protocols or taking those solutions to the denominator. I feel like as long as the entrepreneur is detached from, like, who gets credit. I mean, for example, Pratham, right? Like Pratham, I think, like, seminal contribution is the Asar survey. So when you think about it, it's the most simple protocol of doing a diagnostic for learning assessments. And I think what it's done is it shaped now the learning outcomes conversation, right? So around foundational literacy and numeracy, like that system seen, like over 10 years of just doing Asar very systematically, with kind of volunteer network and publishing that sixth grade students are not able to read a second grade textbook. It's a very simple diagnostic protocol, and that's what's really scaled, right? So I think, like, that's what, like, I think as people passionate about the problem, like, we need to try and discover, like, new ways of, you could say, like, Pratham didn't necessarily solve the learning outcomes problem. It solved the surfacing of the problem to public consciousness and to a systems level consciousness. So that is impact as well. So yeah, I think, I would say, even for example in our work we had to make a choice after the first few years, where we had got almost 50,000 students admitted across multiple states. We had a platform that we could help administer in various states. So the question came up with who will support the students who got admitted. Should we run like a high touch program ourselves, a school readiness program? And we had discovered, like, what's the 100-day program that works. So but we had to make an organizational choice, saying that uh, Intersection can't be the organization which does admissions at scale and also run school readiness programs at scale. So we've discovered the program, let's put out the protocol, and hopefully there actually needs to be a very different organization which does school readiness programs at scale. We then work on intersectional access problems, like we'll work on maternity benefits for pregnant lactating mothers at the earliest stage. Let's work on livelihood benefits for the working parents. So we took that route because we felt that that's something we've achieved mastery on how to do at scale. And doing school readiness camps or programs at scale was going to be very high touch, and that's something we thought another nonprofit should dedicate itself to possibly work with state governments to do it at scale. So yeah, ultimately, like that, those choices are either ideological or constrained by your own resources or your own abilities. So doing things at system scale. But it boils back to this question of what is the innovation that you want to discover, and how do you see it eventually being adopted by public systems. Uh, yeah.
Interesting. That reminds me of so many conversations we have had with founders where they say that they'll do everything, right from education to placements to post placement support, everything that they want to do. And I think one of the things that we try to do is, figure out, okay, what essentially, like pick one thing essentially and do it well, and define basically what is your strength there and do it according to that. So yeah, very interesting. So and I think just wanted to sort of quickly jump to when you sort of recall back at your journey, some of the like some of the mistakes you would have made in the beginning of your journey, which you sort of look at hindsight, and probably entrepreneurs here could benefit from. uh,
Yeah, no, one mistake I made was when I started, I think the theory of change was, I was obviously, I guess, a romantic of bottoms up effort. So I said, like, we'll community organize, we'll help people, file applications, it'll be voluntary networks. And so there was, I guess, a degree of romanticism in that ideology, saying that it'll be bottom up, we'll put demand side pressure, and public systems will respond to that pressure. And so yeah, I think, like, on most metrics, like, we mobilized 1,000 volunteers, we filed 15,000 unique applications, we felt very good about ourselves that we were hitting the streets, we were helping a lot of people. And only about 700 kids got through, so 5%. And so that was a wake up moment, saying, like, okay, all of the process, like, you felt very happy that you were doing something, you're mobilizing a lot of civic energy, but it's not translating into kind of real systems change. Like, 95% kids were kept out because private schools had the power to determine how the lotteries ran, how people could be rejected. So it became clear that the change had to be top down. The state had to come in as a regulator and had to administer the lottery, adjudicate it, maintain a fair regulatory balance. And so then that was kind of a wake up call. So I think that was a mistake in the first 2 years to be romantic about, like, Hanisha said, you're too married to your solution and the ideology. So I was too caught up, wedded to my bottoms up ideology. Then I realized, like, I need to partner with the state as well, and we need to kind of have these admissions go online. The lottery has to be open, transparent, and adjudicated online, so that, one, like, we can maintain equity, and we can balance some of the power asymmetry that exists between private schools and applying parents, and state has to play that balancing act. Secondly, when you cut it across social groups, like, only 70 girls applied for every 100 100 boys. Systematically, there was a bias to send boys to private schools versus girls. So you could do all of that balance only when you did this at a macro level. So it became clear, there were less than 150 students from children with special needs who were applying, whereas 1,500 was the minimum number they should be applying at. So these gaps, like, obviously could not be fixed at a like a micro level. Like, the state needed to intervene. So that was, like, definitely, like, one big mistake in the first 2 years. So we pivoted and we made that change in the third year. So, but it falls in the same category to what Hanisha said. So don't get too married to the solution. So I think if you were very clear that the problem we were trying to solve is, which we were always, like, we were always about solving that problem of giving kids that opportunity to go into school. But in the process, in first 2 years, we were just too caught up with the bottoms up way. So we became just agnostic about uh, which set of interventions, and more about, like, how many kids are actually getting into school. Is the 12 as a policy working at a state level? What needs to happen? And we also became agnostic about, will we get credit for doing the work that needs to be done or not. So he said, no, as long as we can clearly measure publicly, independently, and say, like, these many kids are getting admitted in the state, and we've done at least a significant share of that work behind the scenes without maybe credit as well, that's fine. uh, that was always there, the second spirit, to be kind of less attached to credit, but where to do the work from was a bias or a mistake we did in the first couple of years.
Got it. Interesting. I think maybe we can open the floor to questions from the audience. So, like, if anyone has any questions they would like to ask, please unmute yourself and yeah, share your question. So we have a question here. Like, are there specific problem areas which both of you feel are like need the most attention and non-profit should come up and solve them? I think it's also very relevant because we have entrepreneurs applying who are passionate about social impact but have not sort of narrowed down on a particular domain or a problem statement.
I'm going to quote one of my investees on this one. They started like in 2006, and they've just said one thing: in India, if you're trying to solve a social problem, you're spoiled for choice. Pick one and move. There's no wrong problems, but you could probably go by the numbers if that's what excites you. Like if you have to look at what excites you, right? Do you want to be able to look yourself in the eye and say, okay, I changed the lives of these 50,000 people forever? Or are you saying, okay, whatever, like that, you do you want to be able to quote individual specific cases, then go grassroots. If you want to look at big numbers, then think about a multi-system partnership kind of a thing. But yeah, I mean, if I pick my current pet problem, uh, that's a pretty cool problem to solve. Also, if somebody else wants to join the bandwagon. So again, we picked the livelihoods problem for majority simply because if you look at the numbers, India's current earning numbers, if you earn more than 15,000 rupees a month, you are in the top 10% of the country. A few years ago, you would have been in the top 25% of the country. So, as the spending power of the same money reduces, the number of people earning that money is also dropping, which is counterintuitive and not the sign of a $5 trillion economy. So the gap between the haves and the have-nots will increase, and then it will have follow-on effects on every other SDG. Already, if you look at it, the way it's being tracked, we are on track to meet the sustainable development goals in not only in India but in the entire Asia Pacific region only by 2075. So again, like I'm saying, spoiled for choice. Pick SDG 1, 2, 5, whatever. I mean, there'll usually be multiple SDGs that you'll touch anyway, but move whatever moves the needle. I mean, for me, the personal angle on this, and sometimes you need a personal angle. The personal angle on this was that like my grandparents migrated, like product of the partition, my grandparents migrated from Sindh to, I mean, India I mean, from India to India, but whatever, back in the day in 1947. And I never ever thought of myself as a refugee till I actually moved abroad and looked at refugees from other countries. And kind of struck me that we were fairly comfortably off, completely always comfortably off, because one could always earn. You left behind an entire house, you left behind everything. My grandfather left behind an entire house, but like they say in the middle class, right, your biggest asset is your education, which you can carry around in your brain. So he had a civil engineering degree. He moved from Sindh to Karnataka and still continued to do what he was doing. um, but it really occurred to me, had the partition happened 5 years before he had finished his degree, we wouldn't have been in the same state. So sometimes it's just a matter of circumstance that separates you from that person whom you're trying to help. So I don't know if that answers it for some people. It's just sometimes you have to be able to humanize the problem, contextualize it for yourself, and then say, okay. Because I mean, literally, I saw a girl in a refugee camp in Lebanon, Syrian girl, finished 3 years of engineering, but 3 years computer science, but had to leave her country overnight and couldn't earn anything. Was luckily in a country which allows refugees to work. And we had a program called Impact, which trained people in computer skills. So here's a person with 3 years of a computer science degree who is currently sitting in a refugee camp in Lebanon, cropping pictures for $8 an hour. But still, it's something better than what she had before, which was so as a refugee under the World Food Program, she was entitled to $31 a month. So from she went from $31 a month to $8 an hour. And when I looked at that story and I kind of thought back, I was like, literally there, but for the grace of God, go I. I mean, this could have been my family had India been sort of freed 5-ish years before it did. That
Yeah.
could have been my granddad. 3 years of engineering and no job in sight. So sometimes you just have to say, okay, I mean, can I solve a problem for somebody like this who's close enough for getting an earning, but like, sorry if that answer went on for a little too long.
No, I think that's very relevant. I think sometimes that personal connection to the problem is important because that also allows you to sort of wait through the difficult times, of building the org.
Hmm.
Maybe
Hmm.
Tarun, uh, might want to add something to that.
No, we're very similar. The personal is the political. So I think, like, spend some time, just in self-awareness, like where your source of deep empathy is, ultimately, all social, enterprise, whether for profit or not for profit. It's about, you deeply care about the source of that pain, and like, something within you kind of, moves when you observe that pain. And Anisha, my in-laws are from Sindh as well. So, and luckily, my father-in-law also had the opportunity to become a chemical engineer, and that obviously affected my partner's life trajectory. And very similar, like my social mobility is a story of like lucky accidents like that. The Land Use Act, and my grandmother, getting a share of land ownership, that translating into my father getting a public sector job, and me entering into a good school in a tier 2 city. So all of those, I could look back and say, are lucky odds of lottery, and that shouldn't be the case. Like where you're born, with geography, which pin code should determine what quality of education that you get. So that I was, personally very driven uh, always by, and I thought, like, I always won the ovarian lottery, and so that shouldn't be the case for any child anywhere. But I was motivated by solving that problem in India first. And yeah, I think my pet peeve is, I think we do have, cash or capital is a human construct. So I do believe that, we have enough financial capital and resources for a universal basic income. And I do feel that labor shouldn't be uh, linked with basic income. I think a dignity of basic human life, of access to food security, basic health, basic education, should be the right of every citizen. I feel like that's a social contract of a civilized society. And the math adds up. Like, we just have to believe that the top 1% or 3% or 5%, like Hanisha said, like have a disproportionate share of the wealth. Not just in India, this is a feature across. Wealth and equality is a reality. And so we have to develop systems for faster and better distributions of that wealth, to at least protect everybody from basic vulnerabilities. And we can afford a safety net. So yeah, if somebody wants to really go at that problem, it's as deeply political, as deeply complex. It's not a technology waiting for it to solve it. It is how we've engineered systems to sustain power across class, across caste, across gender, and other social systems. So yeah, if you can crack universal basic income, so anybody motivated in the room, I'm happy to speak to you. That's the end game that I'm working towards.
Awesome. That's very
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah. But
Yeah.
also, sorry to kind of to riff off the what you said about enough money on the food side. Like again, coming back to the food problem, another key problem to solve: food waste, for example, post-harvest losses, plenty of stuff. So again, 820 million people go hungry each night, but at the same time, as a planet, we already grow enough to feed everybody and more. It's just that 40 plus percent of all food grown on the planet goes waste. So that's another big problem to solve. There are, I mean, big problems also exist dime a dozen in every single one of the SDGs. So just take some time. So we keep hearing this phrase called connect the dots, right? But sometimes to connect the dots, you have to collect the dots. So go build some life experiences. If you don't have a sense of which problem you want to solve, pick one, solve it for a little while. So I started out on the livelihoods problem in the smallest way possible in 2011 when I did a small internship, like not even an internship, like a 1 hour thing before office every morning. Like I used to go to Hosrani in opposite Select City Walk in Saket and teach people English uh, to improve their employability. So, and literally saw one guy who was a driver whose English got improved and his income went up almost double. Because instead of working for a local family, he worked for an expat family. So, I mean, at least it started, okay, this looks like a decent problem to solve. So, start small, start somewhere. If nothing, or get your experiences. You're not going to be able to solve this by looking at a bunch of books and top-down research and saying, okay, McKinsey says this or the United Nations says that.
Basically, like get more life experiences, get your hands dirty, essentially. Uh,
Yeah.
Awesome. Tanmay, you have a question. I'm not sure if I completely got it. Do you want to sort of unmute yourself and ask the question? Um, he's trying to ask something about sustainability in terms of solving a problem. Does that mean like you want? Are you asking whether the problem is solved for good, if, or something else? Sustainability in terms of financial sustainability. Okay, I think maybe Tanmay has left us. I'll just jump to another question. If he joins back, he can ask. Okay, scale versus really solving the problem for few. Um, yeah, so I think he's trying to ask whether, uh, you know, like are there any good leading question, guiding questions to understand whether sort of is solving a problem for a few people, but solving it for good, or you're touching more people, with a light touch intervention, and how do you sort of make that choice? Anything that,
Yep.
yeah, you want to add,
So
Hanisha? Yeah.
for me, that would be, I mean, one of the biggest arguments for solving it deep for a few would be in two circumstances. One, I mean, actually, a combination of two circumstances. One, that it's a sort of test case. Like I'm currently solving it for a few, but the problem still does exist for a very large majority. And the second part is that the it's not a massively burning. I mean, every one of them this is a burning problem, no doubt, but it's not such a massively burning problem that if I can I can afford to go deep on this one. If it's a massively burning problem and then you go deep, I think it would have made more sense to go broad and solve it at like 15% solution for a mass bro. So like if like there's a flood outside and you can save 15 people versus you can save a million people, even if you can save those million people for like 5 days, I would do it. That kind of a thing. Because 15% of a problem solved for a bigger population would make sense. That would be my thumb rule. The only chance to go deep, because again every single one of these problems is massive.
Interesting.
The solution, the point is that scalability is difficult but not impossible. Sometimes it's just not in your hands to scale alone. So your scalability could mean finding a partner
Yeah.
who has more power than you, who has more resources than you, etc., etc. So yeah, that you need to know when to bridge from that depth to the breadth.
Right. I think, Tarun, you were alluding to it, figuring out what the solution is and then finding who will execute it at scale, who will be the doer at scale in some ways. Uh,
Correct, correct. And the bit I'll add about sustainability frameworks is that they tend to evolve as well. So you don't need to get stuck. Let's just take poverty as well, right? For a lot of time, our understanding was that it was a consumption line, a dollar a day, dollar and a half, $2. But now our framework has only changed. We think about multidimensional poverty index. We're not just about the consumption line. It's also about what's our access to health, nutrition, certain set of civic amenities like water, energy security, housing, etc. So yeah, I think Tanmay, like the frameworks keep evolving as well, so you can look at the current existing sustainability framework and your contribution itself could be to move that needle, like to move the thinking. So for example, like Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, sustainability was getting kids into school and ensuring that their attendance was there in school. So now, like, that needle has moved. Like, sustainability is no longer about getting kids into school and retaining them in school. It's about actually making sure that they're learning as well and learning well. And that has moved as well. Now people are saying it's not just about foundational literacy and numeracy; it's also about social emotional learning outcome. So those kind of frameworks keep evolving as the system's consciousness keeps evolving as well. Start with where the existing consciousness is, but and work with that. Yeah.
Got it, interesting. I think one of the related questions that we get quite often is when you sort of in the early stages designing your MVP, should you focus on, you know, executing your pilot or MVP with a small set of, users or beneficiaries, or you should be thinking about how will it scale and all of that. Any thoughts on that? Like, how would you do it when you are like doing your first pilots and first tests?
I mean, it's important to test it at least, 100,000 people kind of scale. Otherwise, like, on paper, we all can get too excited about, the neatness and elegant nature of the solution. So I think like it's always good to let the rubber hit the road and, iteratively improve what you think is kind of the solution mix, like at least at a kind of sample of, between 100 to 1000. I think you everybody will have a reality check. So I would say an MVP at kind of that kind of scale of sample size, I found like you will derive 80 to 90% of the learnings, and then the 1000 to whatever next is a system scale, is a lot more about how do you embed some of those solutions into public systems, which is a different game altogether. But for an MVP, whether it's a protocol, a program design, or uh, a platform or a technology solution, so at least kind of iterate with a small sample very rigorously, would be my approach, and that's the approach we've always taken for MVP. Yeah.
Mm. I'd rather argue like MVP with a population where for which you can find a similar but not identical population to kind of follow pretty much immediately. So let's assume you're starting with whatever 100 people to begin with. Um, you should have identified the next 100 soon enough, if not right at the same time, and have a sense of what changes might be needed. Like at least have a hypothesis on what changes might be needed to hit this next 100. You should be thinking scalability from that angle. It doesn't mean that the pilot once created is set in stone, saying, okay, we are going to help these 6,000 fishermen do da da da. It's like today we are starting off with 6,000. Week later or 2 weeks later, there is a second sort of cohort that's following. And this is what will change perhaps in the second cohort. Um, and I mean, I saw this the best displayed in a impact oriented startup that even made it to YC. Like one of the first Nigerian startups that made it to YC. First time I spoke to them, they had 6,000 customers, and we were sitting in, I think, the December of 1 year. I asked them by March, where will you be? And he's like 13,000. I was like, okay, 3 months, you want to double? Good. He was at 40 by the time. So had a sense of where pilot 2, pilot 3, pilot 4 will come. What am I testing in this one, which will help me design pilot 2 fast and move.
Yeah, yeah, very interesting. So, like,
Currently they're in $1 million+ top bottom line,
awesome,
and have improved farmers' incomes. I mean, doubled farmers' incomes.
very interesting.
Yeah.
Basically, like testing your assumptions in the first pilot, and
Hmm.
being aware of those, and then seeing what it will
Hmm.
take for the next cohort. How do you need to
Yeah,
modify your program? Got it. Okay, I think we are almost out of time. We'll take the one last question, if that's okay, Tarun and Hanisha.
sure.
Bhavesh here is asking, how do you choose between a non-profit and a for-profit model while you're still trying to make an impact? Leave it up to you.
You don't have to choose. You don't have to choose. There is something called a hybrid also. So there's a startup called Under the Mango Tree that I've been working with for the past decade. They help farmers improve incomes by becoming beekeepers as a secondary source of income. There is a for profit and there is a society. The society works with farmers to train the farmers, teach them how to become beekeepers, etc., etc. The for profit buys the honey that the farmers produce and markets it. So you